Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Christmas morning. Matt Rhule, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, making another really impressive addition coming out of the transfer portal. Former Idaho cornerback Andrew Marshall committing to Nebraska. You look at Andrew Marshall and say 800 snaps last year for Idaho. That's always a number that jumps out to me. When you're playing that much football, that tells me the coaching staff thinks that we can't have you come off the football field. And that's a really good start. And then you look at first team all conference, one of the best cornerbacks in the FCS last year, coming over to the power four level. I think the question is, all right, can he translate that really good football play at FCS to the power four level? You turn on the film from this kid against Oregon and say, yeah, he fits the bill. I mean, those are some of the better wide receivers that you're going to see in the country. And I thought Andrew Marshall went toe to toe with guys like Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. And so you kind of get the sense that he's going to translate quite well to the power four level. And I think secondly, it's not only Nebraska that thinks this kid can play at the power four level. He had a ton of offers and a ton of interest from a lot of other power four programs. And so you look at Andrew Marshall and say you feel pretty dang good that he's going to translate and be in the mix for Nebraska at the boundary cornerback spot. That's a position that even if Andrew Marshall does not start right away for Nebraska, is going to be a very, very big addition because the depth in that cornerback room in 2024 was not all that good. And you look at Nebraska, they had to go to Sayre Wright, who played phenomenal football for Nebraska, but that was a late addition in the summer that Nebraska made prior to fall camp. And then you have a guy like Malcolm Hartzog who has to go play the boundary cornerback spot late in the season, clearly not a boundary cornerback dude. And so you look at Nebraska and say they had some really good starting boundary cornerbacks, but when they had to get into their depth, it became a problem. I think Andrew Marshall not only comes in, I don't think Nebraska would add Andrew Marshall if they don't think he can come in and compete for a starting spot. And just as importantly, I mean, you're adding another cornerback that you have a lot of confidence in that can play for Nebraska in 2025. Want to get a little bit more into Andrew Marshall, talk about what he did at Idaho last year, talk about what the boundary cornerback position is going to look like for Nebraska in 2025. Before we get into it, as always, most importantly, Merry Christmas. Especially to the Nebraska fans, many of y'all have been rocking with the fellas for quite a long time. And y'all know I love talking this program. The amount of support you guys continue to show means the absolute world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Enjoy your holiday, your Christmas. And without further ado, let's get into Andrew Marshall. One of the things you love about him right off the bat, 59 targets faced at Idaho last year. This guy is a battle-tested cornerback that has had the ball thrown his way a lot. And he only gave up 34 catches, a 57% completion percentage when he was targeted. Can play a little bit of press man. I think operates really well in zone coverage in the deeper third as well. And Nebraska is going to want to get versatile in terms of the coverage they're going to throw at opposing offenses. Getting a cornerback that I think can, play some man coverage, can play some zone. I think that's a really big addition. And then you look at, all right, what's this secondary going to look like? I think first Nebraska wanted to get a little bit more athletic. At times it didn't seem like we had enough athleticism in the back end of this defense, whether it's Malcolm Hartzog playing out of position, whether it's Isaac Gifford at times. Andrew Marshall is a premier athlete. And quite frankly, the reason I think he was a little bit under recruited coming out of high school was that you weren't really sure what position he was going to play, but he was a pretty dang good athlete. And, Idaho takes a stab at him, puts him at cornerback, and kind of hits the ground running. Played over 300 snaps as a true freshman as well. So you start looking at it. These, in my opinion, G5 FCS transfers kind of fly under the radar a little bit because I don't think a lot of people are very familiar with their game, which is very understandable. You look at the track record and say guys that have played a lot of good football at lower levels of competition normally translate quite well. I think the transfer portal guys that normally miss in the portal are guys that, okay, they might have been sought after out of high school, but haven't really found the football field, and you're hoping they can kind of find it going to their next spot. These are the guys that when you look at the track record, which it's a small sample size, the transfer portal, being used this much hasn't been around that long. When I look at the best transfer portal additions a lot of those guys come from the G5 and the FCS ranks. Think about a guy like Jared Verse or Braden Fisk at Florida State, guys that have played a lot of football, have dominated at a lot of football, and now are jumping up to the highest level. That's kind of what you're getting with Andrew Marshall, and you get 2 years of eligibility, which I think is pretty clearly important to Matt Rhule in Nebraska. Yeah, we'll take the one and done guys when it makes sense, but we normally want to get guys in the transfer portal that can be within our program for a couple of years. That is Andrew Marshall. He has a redshirt year to use as well, along with his 2 years of eligibility. I would be surprised if he does redshirt because I think this guy's going to play probably right away for Nebraska. Looking at the cornerback room, I think you got a dude in Sear Wright. I think he's going to be one of the best cornerbacks in the Big Ten in 2025. Bly Hill working through a lot of injuries last year, but was a guy that, in spring practice and fall camp, generated a decent amount of buzz. And so you kind of think Bly Hill fully healthy in 2025 could be a dude. Amari Sanders going into year two. That's one of those guys that you didn't hear a ton about as a freshman. I feel like you'll get a year two bump. I would throw in Jeremiah Charles, maybe a year three bump for him. I think he's a freaky athlete that is still trying to learn how to play football at a high level. Stacking talent in this cornerback room. I think you got a couple of guys you feel comfortable starting, and I think you're developing some depth in the cornerback room that is meaningful. That's always the hardest thing to do when you're a new coach. It's easy to get a roster of 11 starters on each side of the football that you feel good about. What's hard is creating 22 guys on each side of the football that you feel good about. And you kind of get the sense that going into year three for Matt Rhule, some of that depth is kind of coming together. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.